Hello, everyone, and this is my slideshow on Chapter 18, Sections 1B and 1C. Okay, so just to be clear, that this little slideshow video and Edpuzzle covers material from what we call the Enlightenment. And so far we read Chapter 18, Section 1A, and that was about the scientific revolution. Let's go ahead then with this material from sections 1B and 1C of Chapter 18. All of this, of course, being part of Unit 1. This slideshow video includes information about some very important people from the Enlightenment, men and women who contributed to new ways of thinking. And so let's begin with Voltaire, Voltaire. Voltaire. Now, Voltaire was not the real name of Francois, that's how we say Francois Marie Arouet. And even though the name Marie is there, that he was a man, Francois Arouet. The Marie, oftentimes Frenchmen, as part of their name, they would have like a name of the Virgin Mary as like their baptism, or perhaps their mother or grandmother's name. So Francois Marie Arouet, he had what was called a pseudonym. Maybe you've heard of the term pseudonym from English classes. That means a pen name. He that was like a fake name, a nickname, a pen name, a pseudonym. And his was Voltaire. It means like empty space, empty air. It's kind of a joke, right? Now, what is Voltaire known for was championing the idea of religious toleration. In the time that Voltaire lived, Catholicism was the dominant religion, and oftentimes people of different faiths were looked down upon, troubled, persecuted, punished sometimes for being of different beliefs. And so Voltaire had a saying called "crush the infamous thing." And what he was talking about was ending religious intolerance. Voltaire, advocated and championed for religious toleration, respecting everyone's various religious faith. That doesn't mean that he was perfect at it, but he advocated for it. He also advocated for something called free speech. You know how you and I, as American citizens, we enjoy the First Amendment, freedom of speech, don't we? Right? We are free to, our freedom of speech is that our first great right as American citizens. So Voltaire advocated for free speech. And he said, "I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it." Think about that phrase. Isn't that wonderful? I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it. And interesting, isn't it? Because Voltaire, Francois Marie Arouet Voltaire, he lived in France in the 1700s. And look, our American Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution, they come after Voltaire, but they see how they're influenced by this Enlightenment movement. It doesn't mean that Voltaire wanted to abolish the monarchy, the idea of a king. In fact, he could see it being kept. And one of his most famous works is a book titled Candide, which is a satire. It's a very funny, very humorous story about a young man who goes on this adventure, and he's kind of this. I'm not going to say stupid, but Candide is not too bright, and so he goes on this adventure where he gets into all of these situations that because he's not quite sharp, when it comes to thinking, he runs into all these problems. Let's go to our next slide here. Our next person from the Enlightenment who really contributes a lot is named Baron Montesquieu, the Baron Montesquieu, okay? And when we look at what was he known for, what was his big contribution to this idea process of the Enlightenment, was he promoted the idea that power in government should be separated. It should be separated out among different bodies, and they call that a separation of power, or sometimes you'll see separation of powers. And what this means is that power should be shared among several governing bodies in government. No one person or no one body should have all the power. So if you think about, look at, this is similar to our system in the United States. We have a president, we have a Congress that makes laws, and we have a judicial branch, the Supreme Court, that determines the constitutionality of those laws. So we share government power among these different bodies. And so this means that there's a system of what Montesquieu called checks and balances, so that too much power will not end up in the hands of one person or one governing body, right? And so his most famous work is called Spirit of the Laws, the Spirit of the Laws. And that's where he put forward these ideas of the separation of power, right? Our next person from the Enlightenment is Denis Diderot. Diderot is Denis Diderot. And Diderot's big contribution, he was the editor of the very first encyclopedia in history. And in fact, I have in room 27, I have an abridged or shortened version of his encyclopedia. It's quite interesting. Now, Diderot, what he did is he invited several philosophers from around Europe back in the 1700s to contribute essays on a variety of subjects, right? On art, on history, on different cultures, on nature, on politics and religion, just every kind of imaginable. So it's kind of, now you see where the encyclopedia comes from, is the idea that an encyclopedia is a little bit of information about pretty much everything, right? And so Diderot's encyclopedia was just that. It was essays about a variety of subjects, and what Diderot hoped to do was to create a convenient resource for the spreading of Enlightenment ideals, such as political rights, religious toleration, law reform, and just a general improvement in society to help humanity achieve a higher level of knowledge and understanding. Okay? Because the encyclopedia, because it was printed, it means that it's more readily available to more people, huh? Okay? Now we have Adam Smith, our next figure. Adam Smith is an example of the English Enlightenment. Okay, Adam Smith lived in England. The other names that we looked at so far, like Montesquieu and Voltaire, they were in France. So Adam Smith's an example of the English Enlightenment, and he applied Enlightenment principles to economics. What we talk about, like economics as like the movement of goods and services among people, right? Purchasing things in stores, and then people earning money to make those things, and so on. Now, Smith, he believed that the old way of making money, which was called mercantilism, he rejected that mercantilist notion in favor of what's called a free market, which we enjoy. And in one of his famous works called The Wealth of Nations, he uses an example of like a pin making factory. Believe it or not, at one point pins had to be made by hand. And so he said, well, if you break the job down into many different steps, then more people can make more pins in a day instead of having one person do it, right? And so we call this like the breaking up the job, like that, right? And it's like making a more efficient system, okay? And then we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now we're back in France. And Rousseau's famous quote is this one here: "Men are free but remain in chains." And so when you think about chains, you think about like being bound, right? Being constrained, right? And Rousseau believes that basically what happens is we all agree to be free, but we are bound by that agreement, right? We are bound by that agreement to be free. That all individuals, like for instance in our country, in our great nation of America, we agree to our most cherished liberties and freedoms, don't we, right? And that agreement binds us. Rousseau preferred what's called a balance between reason and feelings and passions. And so he believed that life should be a balance between, the emotions and passions of the heart, as well as the intellectual ideas in the mind. He advanced the notion of what's called a social contract between government and people. He believed that the government governs by the will of the people, and it's called a social contract. You know how when you sign a contract, when you buy a car or you buy a house, you sign a contract, right? With the bank, if you take out a loan, for instance, right? And there's a contract. His most famous work is probably Amélie, um, and uh, so we'll talk more about all these people in class, but I just wanted to introduce them here. Our last slide here talks about some contributions from women at the time. Maria Winkelmann was a German scientist. That's why, if you notice, the spelling of her name is Winkelmann. And so, a lot and often in the German last names, when a German name ends in man, it's usually double N, Winkelmann. So, Maria challenged the notion that female scientists could not be published. Now, this was true at the time. If you were a woman scientist like Maria, Maria was a very successful female scientist, but the fact that we have to say that she was a female scientist shows that, why can't we just say that she was a scientist? Well, because at the time, their women scientists had to overcome this idea. They couldn't publish their work. Think about that, right? And so they could do all these great things, but they couldn't publish them. Finally, we have Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, she was English, okay? Maria was German, and Mary Wollstonecraft was English. And she wrote a work titled Vindication of the Rights of Women. And in that, Mary Wollstonecraft argued against the popular thinking that believed women, because they were women, belonged in certain roles, like keeping a good home and raising the family. And so she challenged that notion. She published and questioned the very thinking behind it. So you see, the Enlightenment is really involving all people from around Europe and other parts of the world we're going to look at as well, who are questioning these notions and preconceived ideas and really challenging, making people ask the question, are you sure that your thinking is correct? Are you thinking the right way? Okay?